boss that they're all terrified of. And they are. I mean, he rules by fear. He is not inspired. He's not. People lead by different methods. And Stephen Harper once said, so I'll just quote him on this point, that he didn't like to hire, he didn't want to hire anyone unless he saw fear in their eyes. Yeah. So as a test of your relationship building, that's not good. So I think the Conservative Party would not be the danger that I see it now if he were not personally in charge, right? Somebody else would make a big difference. But, having achieved and this again, back to the problems of first past the post, I shouldn't have glossed over this one. If not for first past the post, no other voting system in any democracy on this planet would allow 39% of 61% of the vote to deliver a majority government. It's only because it was a combination of the unexpected NDP surge and the Liberal collapse that it was only, I think it was a total of 14 ridings that made the difference between minority and a majority government. And of the closest of those ridings, where it was a really close call, who got elected, and this is all on the Fair Vote Canada website, the difference was in some ridings, 20 votes that had to do recounts. Other ridings, 100 votes. Other ridings, 200 votes. The collectivity of Canadian votes that delivered a majority government to a party supported by the minority of Canadians was 6,201. So that's why it really doesn't make sense to ever believe that votes don't count. I mean, in those close ridings, even 100 votes in a different direction in 14 ridings would have delivered another minority government. So a lot of hands went up. So I'm going to go to the gentleman there, and I'll come back down to you, and then I'll go to over here. Yeah.
As leader in some way, either from opposition leader or, former government,
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question in regards to nation building. And if you feel that the process of nation building is complete in this country, I'm referring to Quebec not signing the Constitution, and I think that's an informative side. I've watched the debates in the House of Commons and I've watched political parties go back and come and go. And I think that there's a real problem if Quebec doesn't sign the Constitution. I'm just wondering what your position on that is.
Well, we also think it's a real problem. But our position around Quebec and its role in the Federation and in Confederation is and we recognize basically three founding people, English, French, and First Nations, in the way Canada has evolved. So I would say the bigger and larger problem for me in nation building is the treatment of First Nations, because I see it as an immediate and constant injustice, whereas in Quebec, in some ways, there's a lot of people in Quebec right now who are saying, let sleeping dogs lie. We don't want to have to revisit it, but we're happy to live like this. It's kind of like, it's one of those bad marriages you grow into. And divorce is way too much trouble, but I really don't want to go back to dating. It's a comfort zone problem. And in terms of Quebec, the policy of the Green Party, and by the way, all of our policies at the federal level are all the time available on our website, not just in elections. And it's a rather too long document, but it's called Vision Green. And you can find, I think, any issue you're interested in. And on Quebec, and the relationship between Quebec and the rest of Canada, because as Greens we value grassroots democracy, we respect self-determination, and if Quebecers were to decide that they wanted to live separate from the rest of Canada, that's their right. Just as we would say that for other peoples and other nations. But our strong preference is that we rebuild the federation that is Canada through national programs and a national vision. And I firmly believe that Stephen Harper is not a conservative who belongs to a libertarian branch of philosophy that really doesn't even like the idea of government at all. And he is quietly dismembering government. So the level at which the federal government ceases to perform functions it should be performing, such as enforcing the Canada Health Act, developing national vision around transportation. You've got a condemned bridge in Saskatoon. Montreal has a couple of condemned bridges. We got bridges falling down because there's been, and it's not just Stephen Harper, that's a question of about a decade worth of thinking that we could transfer the deficit from the financial books of Canada and run the deficit on infrastructure instead. And it's at a certain point, and this is actually, virtually word for word, I don't want to be accused of plagiarizing, I'm just realizing I'm coming very close to Terry Fallis's second book. I don't know how many of you saw the first book. It was called, it won the Canada Reads competition on CBC. It was called Best Laid Plans. It was a political farce. His second in that series is called The High Road, and it, literally the signal event that drives the plot for that book is the collapse of the interprovincial bridge between Hull and Ottawa. And everybody starts looking into why we weren't doing maintenance. And at that point, it shifts from being fiction to being a really good job in educating Canadians about how we have ignored our infrastructure for too long. So if you're nation building, you think like Sir Johnny MacDonald. Yes, we need a railroad that brings us together east to west. Yes, we need to think of national programs and national child care programs and ending poverty. You know, there's national vision and national purpose. And, you know, for Quebec, projet de société. C'est quelque chose we need to have that kind of vision that makes everyone think all for one and one for all. We're all in this enterprise together. And the more you have a government that says, yeah, you're on your own, buddy. Look out for your own back, because that guy over there, who knows, he might be a terrorist. He might be a war criminal. Let's put him in jail before we have a trial. And for that, we need more jails. That kind of thinking is really dangerous and counterintuitive if you're interested in nation building. I said I'd go to Lynn, and I said I'd go to the young man back there, and then the lady in the turquoise. Yeah.
I talked to so many people who said, I'd love to vote Green, but I can't. I have to vote strategically for the exact reason that you gave before.
Yeah.
Because if I don't vote for this Liberal candidate or this NDP, then the Conservative will get in and Stephen Harper will have a majority government.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Well, of course, you know, the problem with strategic voting is, again, going back to the question, how do we get Canadians to vote? And I've voted strategically different times in my life over the years. It's very tempting. You think, okay, I've got to be smart about this. I can't vote for what I want. I have to vote for something slightly less nauseating than... So if when you go to vote, you're holding your nose or worse. Whether you see the voting results, you think, oh, gee whiz, it didn't make any difference at all. I should have voted for what I want. If you end up feeling physically ill from the process of voting, you are much less likely to vote next time. So, number one, you should vote for what you believe in. You should be empowered by your vote. Right? Strategic voting, you never know. You can guess wrong. Oh God, there were people in my riding. Oh, okay, they were educators in my riding, desperately trying to convince their friends right at the last minute that it would be wrong to vote Green because they had to vote strategically to get rid of Gary Hunt. And if that had caught on, Gary would have gotten in again. Because the people who couldn't believe I was really winning were in denial because I actually, you know, I won by a big margin. But the strategic vote thing is really pernicious. The last thing about it, of course, is that it's a constant reason to move to proportional representation. But if we can get people voting for what they believe in, if nothing else, and this is a message to people for this provincial election, if you really want the government of Saskatchewan to know that you oppose nuclear power, there's only one vote you can do. Any other vote can be confused. The only vote that says I'm against a nuclear reactor in Saskatchewan and I'm against uranium mines in Saskatchewan is to vote Green, because the other parties are compromised on them. It sends a message, right? And with any luck, it'll send at least one new MLA who's Green into the legislature, because one vote makes a real difference in Parliament. So I didn't want to go on too long on every question because I promised who was back?
Yeah, right.
That further back with the black t-shirt. Yeah, you were first.
Given that you see democracy as being decayed in Canada, you support, as a matter of ideology, the Green Party, the decentralization of power to resilient communities in Canada, which are communities that provide their own needs independent of the market state?
We do support greater powers to the municipalities as a rank of government. We do, in our Vision Green, talk about the role of municipalities as being critical. The devolution of power from Canada as a national entity, though, we don't support. But resilience in communities is aided when you have a federal government that isn't working against it, right? So when you get the tax structure right, we're going to need to have a federal health care. We need support for health care. It's a provincial health care system, but it's funded largely federally. We need to have representation in Parliament to decide what are the priorities in fiscal programs. we totally support resilient small communities because we're a grassroots party. So it's one where we have that tension of yes, resiliency, yes, local, more power to local municipalities, but not at the expense of the ability to think like a country at the United Nations, for instance. So, yes, you were next.
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
Number one, this may seem like a totally impossible thing, but it's just, I don't know if I've got a question. Me and my boyfriend always talk about do you think it's possible for half of Canada, the west side of Canada, to split up from the east and kind of do our own thing? Because they're very...
Anything is possible, but how it would work, I don't know. I mean, I love Canada as it is. I don't want to change. I mean, I'd love to have, I'd like to be sustainable. I'd like to reduce our carbon footprint. But the boundaries of our country, I don't want to see British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba separate. How much is in your west? Is
BC to end of Manitoba and up.
All right. Well, I mean, if there was a movement that made that happen, that would be legitimate.
Yeah.
But for me, I think it's much more important. Given the perils globally, which is another argument I use with my friends who are sovereigntists in Quebec, what the hell difference does it make what our boundaries are? We're on one planet, and we're going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
So I'd kind of rather put our energies into working with what we have now to shift from being globally a laggard in so many things to being globally a leader. And I really don't think there's, although you sort of belong to the Eastern group, having come from Cape Breton Island, lived in the mainland of Nova Scotia. Now, believe me, anybody here from Nova Scotia? Okay. The mainland of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island are not the same province. Okay? The Cape Breton Liberation Army was only sort of a joke. I was getting a lot of tweets when I defended Nicole Turmel about whether I ever belonged to a radical separatist faction. So I tweeted back that I, supported General John Cabot Trail and the Cape Breton Liberation Army because it's an old satirical skit that would come every summer in Cape Breton and the rise and falls of Cape Breton Island. Cape Breton Island is nothing like the rest of Nova Scotia. Newfoundland and Labrador, it is nothing like Nova Scotia. Prince Edward Island is nothing like Nova Scotia. New Brunswick, I don't want to talk about it. This is a country of very different cultures, even within. Do you think anyone in Thunder Bay likes Toronto? So, given our regional divisions, the East isn't really the East. I mean, it drives me nuts when people say, if I go from my friends in BC, if I have to go to, well, of course I have to go to Ottawa all the time, they say, you go east. I say, no, I'm only getting as far as Ottawa. So we're one country full of different characters and flavors, and I think we should just work on it. Yeah.
Second question.
Second question, right.
What's your policy on abortion?
We absolutely support the access to safe, legal abortions. We would prefer, Bill Clinton once said abortions should be safe, legal, and rare. That's about where we are. Yeah. And the young man on the aisle there had his hand up a minute ago.
Sorry, 1 second.
That's okay. Take
Okay,
your
you
time.
used an interesting and I would say rather fearful term, and that was voter suppression techniques.
Yes.
I just wanted to know where that term originates.
Republican Party in the United States, and I've actually heard.
Like, I don't mean in who uses it, I mean who coined that term.
I think it may. I don't know whether it was Karl Rove or one of the other Republican strategists. I heard in the Canadian election, I heard Mick Nanos on CTV News refer, and I thought to myself, why isn't Sandy Ronaldo falling off her chair? But he actually said out loud that Harper might need to use more voter suppression techniques before election day because he was seeing certain trends happen. I mean, I know this is going on. When I wrote my book, which wasn't that long ago, I never heard the term voter suppression technique. I deduced it was happening from a number of things I saw Stephen Harper do in 2008, such as snap election when no one expected it on September 7th, 2008, when there were 3 by-elections called for the next day that got canceled and another by-election. So he lured people into thinking there was no chance of a fall election because of 4 by-elections. Then we had a snap election when students weren't able to vote because they hadn't been on campus long enough. And then we voted on the Tuesday after the Thanksgiving long weekend. And on top of that, we held these attack ads. And I thought, well, all of this is to discourage people from voting. And then I saw one or two journalists write, Stephen Harper's been deliberately discouraging people from voting. I'd still never heard the term voter suppression technique. And after the election was over, I was talking to a friend of mine who worked in the senior levels of the Obama campaign. And I was telling him about my election, he was telling me about theirs, and then I talked about what was going on here, and he said, oh yeah, Republicans do that all the time. It's called a voter suppression technique. So then I Googled it and found voter suppression technique literature. But again, when it was on the news, in a casual way, from Nick Nanos as pundit, talking about voter suppression techniques in Canada, without batting an eye. We need to know what's going on out there, because I think that's a great motivator for people. I don't know, I'm sure all of you vote, or you wouldn't be sitting in this room talking to me. But for those of your friends who don't vote, spring it on them and see what they think, to know that, yeah, there's people spending a lot of money to try to keep you from voting. And it's just based on mind games.
We have the spirit, Elizabeth away. She's going to be speaking at 7 o'clock at the main library downtown, right? She's getting in the future. We hope that you're all going to come to that. And I'd like you to join me in thanking her.
You'll see me limping around Parliament Hill, but it'll be over really soon. I'll be gone for 15 minutes.